a pork pig! I'm the big pig! I'm the big pig! Pig!
Heyo! What's up there, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht. This week was supposed to be starting a multi-part series that I'm still working on. A lot going on, a lot of things taking place in life right now, and dealing with that as well. So, luckily, I have a backup episode to make sure get some out there. Today, we're going to discuss and explore the strange realm of pigmen. Let's do it. There are certain monsters that feel strangely modern. Creatures that don't necessarily originate from ancient forests or as the bastard spawn of forgotten gods, but instead from industrial waste, contaminated rivers, rusted machinery, and the many psychological anxieties of today's fast-paced modern world. The radioactive mutant, the escapee experimental lab rat, the, not literal rat, but, the metaphorical lab rat. The smiling thing caught on grainy security footage at 3 a.m, somewhere just outside of a dying town. But the pigman. The pigman's different. The pigman feels older. Older than modern horror, older than cryptozoology itself even. Because long before people were reporting strange, upright, bipedal, swine-featured figures along abandoned roads or whispering about creatures lurking near slaughterhouses and drainage tunnels, humanity had already spent centuries associating pigs with something spiritually dangerous. Across cultures and throughout the ages, pigs have occupied an uncomfortable symbolic territory. They're intelligent enough to resemble us, omnivorous enough to disturb us, and physically similar enough to the human body that modern medicine routinely uses pig tissue, pig heart valves, and pig skin grafts in surgical procedures. There's something deeply uncanny about the animal. In medieval Europe, pigs were associated with gluttony, filth, disease, and demonic possession. In battlefield accounts and plague-era folklore, they were often accused of feeding on human corpses. In the criminal underworld, pigs became creatures capable of erasing entirely any reasonably edible types of evidence. Better yet, don't just take my word for it. Please accept this highly credible expert testimonial, as its unsettling level of specificity most definitely exhibits a sense of highly detailed familiarity attained via direct experience.
You've got to starve the pigs for a few days, then the sight of a chopped up body will look like curry to a piss head. You've got to shave the heads of your victims and pull the teeth out for the sake of the piggish digestion. You could do this afterwards, of course, but you don't want to go sieving through pig shit now, do you? They will go through bone like butter. You need at least 16 pigs to finish the job in one sitting, so be wary of any man who keeps a pig farm. They will go through a body that weighs 200 pounds in about 8 minutes. That means that a single pig can consume 2 pounds of uncooked flesh every minute. Hence the expression, as greedy as a pig.
Ironically enough, these synonyms for swine simultaneously became a derisive term referring to law enforcement, which persists to this day as an international, cross-cultural, multilingual shorthand for dirty, gluttonous, power-hungry, and or corrupt entities likely to beat the shit out of you, or worse, were you or anyone else to refer to them as such.
Forgive me, Officer Figpucker.
Much of the porcine-inclined operational logic is deeply embedded within many levels of global socio-political power structures. Something prevalent in the thoughts and behaviors of both individuals and institutions whose continuous, most prominent, sole contribution to the world seems to be purely pig shit. Or any pig shit substitute of equal or lesser value, who truly relish reveling in the bloody muddy pandemonium of the pigpen, especially one that's entirely full of their pig shit. But hey, that's just me. I am an eternal optimist, champion of mankind. although it might go some ways to perhaps maybe explaining just a few of what could potentially be any number of reasons as to why such horror stories of pig-headed humanoids persist. Because unlike dragons or giants or sea serpents, the pigman doesn't feel impossibly distant from humanity. The pigman feels like humanity, but just slightly twisted sideways, eyes akimbo, as reflections in muddy water, a thing that walks upright yet shouldn't, a creature that seems less like an entirely separate species and more like some terrible contamination of the human form itself. The stories appear everywhere, in the forests of England, along isolated American roads, in Mexican ranchland folklore, in Victorian rumor, in medieval fairy tales, in demonological texts, in late-night paranormal call-in shows, in whispered encounters passed between teenagers daring each other to drive down forgotten roads after midnight. The details change. Sometimes the creature is described as a mutant, sometimes as a demon, sometimes as an unfortunate, disfigured individual, or a poor and wretched accursed thing that was once upon a time a man. Sometimes a cryptid, sometimes merely an escaped lunatic, wearing the skin of an animal. But certain details keep reoccurring with disturbing consistency. The smell, the squealing, the breathing, the posture, the eyes reflecting headlights beside a fence line at the edge of nowhere. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the fact that pigman stories rarely emerge from great cities. Sorry, it's true. They emerge from places where civilization feels fragile. Rural roads, slaughterhouse districts, fields, woods, abandoned farms, forgotten tunnels, places where the mud and the blood and the beer, not to mention steaming, heaping piles of pig shit, still cling to the edges of human life. Places where older fears survive. One story from upstate New York tells of a driver traveling down a lonely road after midnight sometime in the late 1960s. According to the account, the man initially believed he was looking at another motorist standing beside a damaged fence line. It was raining heavily, visibility was poor, but as his headlights swept across the figure, he realized the proportions were wrong. They were all wrong. Shoulders were too broad, the posture too hunched. And when the thing turned its head towards the vehicle, the witness claimed he saw a pale snout glistening in the rain. The figure allegedly stepped into the road.
It's a pig man! A pig man!
The witness accelerated, and according to later retellings, he never drove that route again. Good call. Whether the story happened exactly as claimed is almost besides the point, because stories like it appear again and again across both decades and entire continents. Different roads, different witnesses, but almost always the same thing, waiting in the dark. Not simply the modern legends of pigmen stalking highways and forests, but the much older mythology beneath them. The curses, the fairy tales, the demonology, the transformation myths, strange historical rumors of pig-faced aristocrats hidden away from public view. The folkloric fear of becoming an animal. The unsettling reality that pigs themselves occupy a uniquely horrifying place in the human imagination. This isn't merely the story of a monster. It's the story of a symbol. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the headlights, something is still squealing. Long before pigmen began appearing in modern paranormal folklore, pigs already carried an immensely symbolic weight across the ancient world. Unlike wolves or bears or snakes, pigs existed in an uncomfortable proximity to humanity. They were domesticated but never fully trusted, intelligent but filthy. Like meat, useful yet spiritually suspect, delicious but unhealthy. They lived close to people while simultaneously embodying appetite, excess, decay, and contamination. Religious prohibitions concerning pigs appear across multiple traditions. In the ancient Near East, swine became associated with ritual impurity. By the time medieval Christianity inherited portions of these older symbolic systems, pigs had already accumulated centuries of negative spiritual associations. They became linked not just to filth and gluttony, but to moral corruption itself. Medieval sermons routinely used pigs as symbols of gluttony, lust, and spiritual degradation. Paintings and carvings often depicted demonic figures alongside swine imagery, reinforcing the idea that pigs existed dangerously close to the world of sin and temptation. One of the most influential moments in Western religious tradition involving swine appears in a biblical account of demonic possession. According to the narrative, Christ encounters a possessed man inhabited by numerous demons, identifying themselves collectively as Legion. Because, they'd be rolling deep. When spirits are cast out, they enter a nearby herd of pigs, which then rush violently into the water and drown. The image is brief and unforgettable. The swine become vessels for corruption itself, a physical container for spiritual contamination, and quite possibly even the progenitors of a long-hidden race of subaquatic Piscean porcine devil swine. This bacon tastes a little fishy. Over centuries, that imagery lodged itself deeply into European consciousness. Pigs became associated not only with filth, but also possession, madness, and spiritual danger. Folk traditions expanded upon these fears in increasingly bizarre ways. In some regions, it was believed witches could transform into pigs or send demonic swine familiars into villages at night. Elsewhere, tales circulated of ominous spectral black pigs appearing along roads shortly before disaster or death. In English folklore, the appearance of a phantom swine occasionally functioned as a death omen, especially near crossroads and isolated woodland paths. The pig also occupied a strange position in relation to death itself. Medieval records and folklore both contain disturbing accounts of pigs feeding on corpses. During times of plague and warfare, half-feral swine sometimes wandered through devastated settlements, scavenging cadavers. These incidents became embedded in collective memory. The image of pigs consuming human remains created an especially powerful psychological horror because it inverted the relationship between humanity and livestock. Suddenly, mankind no longer appeared dominant. The boundary separating human from animal became frighteningly unstable. That instability lies at the very heart of pigman mythology. The fear isn't merely of a dangerous creature, but of contamination, degeneration, and transformation. I rest my case. The possibility that the human body itself might slide backwards into something muddy, squealing, ravenous, and bestial. A maddening atavism, twisting mankind into meat. As Europe moved deeper into the medieval and early modern eras, pig symbolism began attaching itself to stories of transformation and inherited intergenerational corruption. These tales frequently involved nobles, wealthy families, or individuals who'd violated moral or spiritual laws and were punished through grotesque bodily alterations. In many cases, the transformation served as both physical curse and a form of social humiliation. One of the strangest and most persistent examples emerged in the form of the so-called pig-faced lady legends. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, rumors spread throughout parts of England and Ireland concerning aristocratic women supposedly born with completely human bodies but the faces of pigs. These stories weren't confined to obscure rural folklore either. They circulated widely through the newspapers, pamphlets, and even public debates occasionally addressed that the possibility of such women genuinely existed. In fact, back in those days, there were almost constant floating accusations of such abominations being the unholy products of quote-unquote monstrous copulations. In fact, this may be the origin of the modern slang term porking. Maybe. In early colonial New England and broader Anglo-American frontier folklore, there were persistent bestiality accusations used as a moral panic narrative.
That'll do, pig.
Especially in Puritan legal culture, where sexual transgression stories were sometimes recorded in court documents. These accounts almost always functioned as social control narratives rather than literal biological claims. However, ask former Prime Minister David Cameron. Anyways, they rarely survive with verifiable specifics in modern scholarship. These likely spring forth from earlier European antecedents, especially medieval and early modern monstrous birth stories, where children born with deformities were retroactively explained through moralized or supernatural causes, sometimes involving animals. In pamphlet literature, this occasionally drifted into grotesque rumor chains involving pigs, goats, or demons, but again, these are only folklore tropes rather than traceable biographical cases, to the best of my knowledge. And trust me, I looked harder than any person probably ever should. There's yet to be any record or proverbial smoking gun of some grotesquely deformed pig boy kept chained up in a basement or an attic someplace that lived off of a consistent diet of fish heads by the bucketful. However, I've yet to be granted a full investigation of places such as Buckingham Palace, or hell, maybe even the White House. Then there's the third layer, later 19th to 20th century sensational folklore collections and weird history compilations that sometimes retrofit shocking claims onto vaguely remembered colonial figures or unnamed settlers. That's where a lot of the man/pig offspring style stories tend to originate, free-floating anecdotes without any archival anchoring. Perhaps the most famous version of these human-pig hybrid nightmare tales usually tended to center around stories of a wealthy woman living somewhere in London high society whose pig-like appearance was forbidden in public and thus hidden from the public through elaborate secrecy. Depending on the version of the story, the condition may have originated from a witch's curse, divine punishment, maternal vanity, a bargain made with some dark forces generations earlier, or maybe even some underlying understanding of just what type of things these filthy rich degenerates were usually engaging in when behind closed doors. Some versions claimed the women communicated only through grunts or squeals. Others insisted they spoke perfectly normal despite their grotesque features. The fascination with these stories reflected broader anxieties developing within European society at the time. Physiognomy, degeneration theory, and pseudoscientific ideas concerning inherited moral corruption were becoming increasingly popular. People believed that evil and/or cretinism could be displayed right there in some poor bastard's plug ugly mug, while bumps on their head measured the content of one's character. A fear that a person's inner moral failings might physically manifest upon the body resonated deeply within the public imagination of the time. The pig face became symbolic of hidden appetites, uncontrollable vice, and animalistic degeneration, lurking beneath aristocratic refinement. But the roots of these stories stretched even deeper into fairy lore and transformation mythology. European folklore contains countless tales involving humans transformed into animals as punishment. Greedy men often became swine. Cruel rulers developed tusks and bristles. Young women who insulted supernatural beings found themselves cursed with snouts or hooves. In Celtic traditions, shape-shifting and animal transformation frequently occurred near liminal spaces: forests, burial mounds, rivers, crossroads, and ancient ruins. The fairy world itself often appeared deeply unstable, a realm where human identity could be altered or erased entirely. Some folklorists have noted recurring overlaps between pig imagery and the fairy realm. Wild boars, in particular, became associated with supernatural danger, especially within Celtic and Germanic mythology. Certain monstrous boar-like behemoths functioned almost as agents of chaos, emerging from forests to devastate entire regions, devouring townsfolk right along with all of their crops. In Welsh mythology, the enchanted boar, Twrch Trwyth, rampaged across the countryside in a destructive frenzy while pursued by King Arthur himself. The creature wasn't merely an animal, but a transformed being carrying supernatural significance. Even beyond explicitly pig-headed creatures, fairy lore repeatedly returned to the fear of becoming animal. Human beings lured into fairy feasts found themselves transformed. Travelers who insulted hidden entities suffered bodily curses. Entire bloodlines became marked by strange deformities interpreted as supernatural punishments. And running beneath many of these stories was an uncomfortable implication. No, not that one. Civilization itself might be fragile. Beneath noble clothing, beneath church doctrine, beneath polite society, there remained a ravenous, feral, bloody-tusked pork orc just waiting to resurface. Transformation myths involving pigs also intersected with a broader category of European folklore, sometimes referred to as the animal bridegroom tradition. In these stories, human beings became entangled romantically or matrimonially, i.e. knowing one another in the biblical sense, etc., with animal-headed figures whose true nature remained hidden beneath enchantments. The beastly exterior often reflected moral corruption, supernatural punishment, or liminal identity. While wolves and bears appear frequently in such tales, pigs occupy a uniquely unsettling role because of their proximity to humanity. A wolf represents wilderness. A pig represents domestication gone wrong. One recurring motif involved wealthy but grotesque suitors possessing pig-like features who sought marriage into noble families. Sometimes these transformations could be reversed through love or religious intervention, but often there were other times it could not. In fact, in some of the darker variations upon this theme, the animal-headed figure consumed or corrupted those around them. Now, that's a horror movie I would definitely watch a pirated online bootleg version of. These stories reveal something psychologically fascinating. The horror doesn't stem solely from the existence of the beast. It stems from the possibility that the beast might successfully pass among humans. The pig-headed nobleman who attends banquets, the pig-faced lady who participates in society behind veils and closed doors. The monster exists not outside civilization, but hidden within it. The call is coming from inside the house. But who was found? The same fear survives into modern-day pigman encounters. Witnesses rarely describe encountering a purely animal creature. Instead, they describe something disturbingly close to human. A thing standing upright, a creature with hands, a misshapen face with little beady black eyes. Something not just hunting, but watching. The uncanny resemblance to man thus becomes the horror itself. By the 20th century, pigman folklore underwent a dramatic transformation. The old curses and fairy tales never entirely disappeared, but new anxieties began reshaping the mythology. Industrialization, slaughterhouses, chemical contamination, war, disease, cholesterol, scientific experimentation, rural decay. Suddenly the pigman no longer belonged exclusively to ancient folklore. He emerged alongside the highways, beside drainage tunnels, near abandoned factories and collapsing farms. The United States, in particular, produced a remarkable number of regional pigman legends. Many originated during the post-war decades between the 1950s to 1990s, precisely the era when suburban expansion pushed deeper into rural territory, while industrial pollution and environmental fears became increasingly prominent in public consciousness. One of the most famous examples emerged in New York State along a stretch of roadway not at all ironically referred to as Pigman Road. Numerous variants of the legend exist. In some versions, the pigman was once a butcher who went insane after a tragic accident. In others, he was an escaped mental patient who slaughtered pigs in isolation beneath an abandoned bridge, which is odd. While other versions claimed the figure originated as a deformed farmhand, mocked and abused by local townspeople, until he retreated into the wilderness, only to eventually become feral and ferocious, with a chip on his shoulder, against the decent regular people of polite society for some unfathomable reason. A tale that forces us to ask the question, who's the true monster? Civilization? Question mark? The details vary widely depending upon region and storyteller, yet certain imagery remains remarkably consistent. Drivers traveling isolated roads late at night report glimpsing a large figure standing near a tree line or a fence post, etc. Witnesses describe hearing the sounds of squealing that echoes unnaturally through densely wooded areas. Some accounts mention glowing red eyes reflecting in headlights. Others describe a foul odor resembling rotting meat, wet livestock, stagnant mud, or worse. Much worse. Pig shit worse. Many versions of Pigman Road legends include bridges, tunnels, or railroad crossings. These liminal spaces matter psychologically. Folklore has always attached supernatural danger to thresholds and crossings. Bridges, in particular, function symbolically as transitions between worlds, oftentimes with a troll or an ogre or a beast of some kind hiding underneath. Modern urban legends inherited these older symbolic structures even when storytellers no longer consciously recognize them. Another famous New York variant centered around Angola Road near Evans. By the late 20th century, local teenagers frequently drove the isolated roadway, hoping to encounter strange phenomena. Reports included shadowy figures darting across the road, strange animal noises emerging from nearby woods, and occasional claims of an upright creature pursuing vehicles. Paranormal investigators later amplified the mythology further through internet forums, radio programs, and documentary specials. The legend's origins are typically traced back to the 1950s and 60s, a time when the area was more sparsely populated and darkness covered more territory. The central figure was said to be a local butcher, a man whose profession gave him access to the tools of his terrible trade, plus a detachedness to brutality and slaughter that would soon prove monstrous. According to the foundational lore, this butcher began a campaign of psychological warfare against trespassers, or pretty much anyone he deemed unwelcome. His method was grotesquely simple and horrifyingly effective. He'd take the severed heads of pigs and place them upon sharp stakes, lining them up along Holland Road like some grim warning fence. This act alone was enough to cement a local reputation for the area as a place best to be avoided. But the story insists this was merely the appetizer, or an all-you-can-eat smorgasbord of horror. The legend takes a much darker turn with the escalation from animal remains to human victims. One particularly grim account claims the butcher's brutality crossed a definitive line when he shot and killed a man, only to hang the corpse on a meat hook inside his butcher shop, treating human life with the same cold disdain as a frozen slab of meat. This act transformed the figure from a strange recluse into a full-blown murderer in the local psychosphere. However, the most infamous and disturbing chapter of the Pigman legend involves a group of young boys who, emboldened either by teenage bravado, booze, or disbelief, perhaps even some combination of all three, decided to investigate the legend themselves. They ventured onto Pigman Road, likely near the bridge, to confront the myth. According to the tale, they found the Pigman right there waiting for them. Needless to say, the outcome was horrific. The Pigman allegedly captured and murdered the 5 boys, decapitating them and placing their heads on stakes along the bridge in a grotesque mockery of his original pighead warnings. One thing that's always important to remember is that these stories evolved alongside the environment itself. Rural America was changing rapidly during these decades. Family farms collapsed, slaughterhouses closed, entire communities decayed economically. Rusting industrial structures and abandoned agricultural sites became fertile ground for the formation of such legends. The Pigman emerged not merely as a monster, but as a symbol of environmental and socio-economic deterioration. Something had gone very wrong in the countryside, and people increasingly imagined that wrongness taking human shape with the face of a pig. No discussion of Pigman mythology can ignore the industrial horror lurking beneath many of these stories. The rise of mechanized industrial-scale, slaughtermatic, chop-and-slop shops colossally altered man's relationship with animals, especially pigs. Prior to industrialization, most people lived much closer to the realities of animal death. But factory farming transformed slaughtering hogs into something systematically vast, hidden, and disturbingly impersonal. Writers investigating modern horror culture have often noted the symbolic importance of slaughterhouses. They're places where living creatures become meat through capitalist systems designed for maximum profits and efficiency. Blood drains into trenches, carcasses hanging from hooks, machinery screaming through concrete chambers, occasional workplace accidents that permanently disfigures workers. Human beings enter such places and frequently describe profoundly instantaneous psychological discomfort, oftentimes traumatizing them for the rest of their lives. Pigman legends emerging near slaughterhouses therefore carry enormous symbolic weight. The creature becomes almost an embodiment of industrialized guilt, a nightmare generated by mechanized death itself. Some American legends explicitly connect pigmen to industrial accidents or scientific experimentation. Tales circulate concerning escaped hybrid creatures allegedly engineered in secret laboratories or military bases. Other stories describe workers disfigured by chemical spills or brutal accidents within meat processing facilities. Most of these accounts lack verifiable evidence, but their persistence reveals deep anxieties concerning contamination and bodily corruption. The pig's anatomical similarity to humans only intensifies these fears. Modern medicine routinely utilizes pig tissue for human procedures. Xenotransplantation research involving pig organs has generated both scientific excitement and ethical unease. The notion that human and pig biology might be dangerously compatible disturbs many people at a deeply instinctive level, while some others just get hungry. Them's the ones you ought to watch out for. Horror fiction repeatedly exploits this discomfort. Human beings become livestock, bodies processed mechanically, flesh losing its identity. The pigman stands precisely at that threshold, neither fully human nor fully animal. The pigman becomes some walking paradox of porcine mindfuckery. Criminal folklore added yet another dark layer to pig mythology during the 20th century. Across Europe and North America, rumors circulated claiming organized crime syndicates disposed of bodies using pigs. The logic behind these stories seemed horrifyingly plausible. Pigs are omnivores. Under certain conditions, say maybe after one or two missed meals, they can and will consume human remains. Whether individual criminal cases truly unfolded exactly as later rumors claimed often became impossible to determine. Yet the story spread relentlessly through tabloids, crime magazines, and urban legends. Farmers allegedly warned visitors never to enter pig pens alone. Gangsters supposedly disappeared enemies using swine enclosures. Serial killer legends incorporated pigs as instruments of total bodily erasure. These tales mattered because they reinforced the idea that pigs occupied an unnervingly intimate relationship with human flesh. Once again, the boundary separating mankind from livestock appears unstable. Some folklorists have argued that modern pigman legends partially function as reversals of this relationship. Instead of humans feeding pigs, the pigman hybrid emerges as a symbolic predator, reclaiming dominance over humanity itself. The livestock walks upright. This once-upon-a-time slaughtered lifeform ends up inexplicably reanimated and gone hog wild. Perhaps no modern pigman legend achieved greater notoriety in Britain than the reports emerging from Cannock Chase in Staffordshire. Already infamous for paranormal claims involving UFO sightings, black-eyed children, ghostly apparitions, and mysterious disappearances, the region possessed an atmosphere ripe for cryptid mythology long before the pigman stories began circulating widely. Witness descriptions varied considerably, though several recurring elements appeared quite frequently. Individuals exploring wooded trails or driving isolated roads near Cannock Chase reported glimpses of a large humanoid figure possessing distinctly porcine features. Accounts described tusk-like protrusions, elongated snouts, glowing or reflective eyes, and broad muscular frames covered in sparse hair. One especially circulated account involved a woman allegedly encountering the creature near Birches Valley during the 1980s. According to later retellings, she observed a massive figure emerge briefly from the woods before disappearing back into the trees with startling speed. Other witnesses claimed to hear strange squealing noises echoing through the woods at night. If ever there were a time to get the fuck up and go, that would be it. Unlike the New York pigman, which is rooted in the lore of a violent butcher, the Cannock Chase pigman's origin story is far darker, involving an alleged government experiment gone horribly wrong. This story lacks a specific date for the research itself, but claims that scientists conducted unspeakable experiments in so-called cross-species animal husbandry, quote-unquote, on a woman, monitoring her for 10 months before concluding that the project had been a failure. However, 1 year later, they were allegedly stunned to discover a severely delayed pregnancy, which resulted in the birth of a child with a human body with the snout and face of a pig. This hybrid creature, according to the legend, eventually retreated into the dense woods of Cannock Chase to escape the shocked and horrified reactions of others upon its sight, where it supposedly lived ever since. This origin story provides a disturbingly specific and tragic backdrop for the creature's existence, framing it as a victim of the cruel whims of military-industrial mad science, as opposed to a kooky barbecue fetishist Leatherface. The primary location associated with the pigman is the Pie Green Tower, a large structure standing within Cannock Chase. This area is described as an abnormal nexus for a wide range of paranormal phenomena, including UFOs, odd lights, werewolves, giant snakes, Bigfoots, black cats, and even reports of government officials sneaking around the perimeter. The pigman is said to specifically roam this gathering place at midnight, a detail that adds a ritualistic, almost clockwork element to its appearances. Another frequently cited haunt is the German War Cemetery and the area of the dismantled World War II POW camps located within the chase. This connection to sites of historical trauma and death lends a somber and eerie resonance to the sightings, suggesting that the creature may be drawn to places saturated with trauma. The highest point on Cannock Chase is also notorious for sightings of the pigman, characterizing it as some dominant territorial alpha pig overlooking its domain. Alpha pig t-shirts, mugs, gun koozies, and other merch coming soon, by the way. Despite the proliferation of these stories, finding accounts with specific names, dates, and direct quotes from eyewitnesses is notoriously difficult, a fact that's drawn significant criticism from paranormal researchers. Alan Murdy, writing in the March 2025 issue of Fortean Times, expressed deep skepticism about the phenomena in Cannock Chase, pointing to a, quote, lack of identifiable witnesses, unquote, and a heavy media reliance on second and third-hand accounts, quote unquote. This critical perspective highlights a major challenge in validating the pigman legend. The stories often exist as folklore rather than as documented testimony. However, some individuals have come forward, albeit anonymously, to share their experiences. A Reddit user posting under the username u/trustedcharles96 in 2020, who I instantaneously do not trust, provided a first-hand account of a recurring encounter involving their entire family. The user, who lives on the edge of Cannock Chase in an area known as Caverns Wood, reported that, quote, numerous family members have now noticed the same figure stalking them or watching them from the woods, even in brightly lit sections, unquote. While they never managed to capture a photograph, disapproving grumble, they explicitly connect the figure to the local pigman lore, stating, quote, there are photos of similar humanoid beings in the chase. One is known as the pigman and usually haunts the German War Cemetery, unquote. This account is particularly disturbing because it describes a pattern of ongoing, targeted observation by a persistent entity, transforming a chance encounter into a campaign of psychological terror. The most compelling named source associated with the pigman isn't an eyewitness to the creature itself, but a researcher who's collected and documented the lore. Lee Brickley, an author and local paranormal investigator from Cannock. Brickley's written multiple books on the subject, including UFOs, Werewolves, and the Pigman, Exposing England's Strangest Location, Cannock Chase. That's the book's name. And also a Ghost Hunter's Guide to Cannock Chase. In his role as a researcher, he's gathered eyewitness accounts for his books, acting as a conduit for the stories of those who wish to remain anonymous. While the specific details of these accounts are largely confined to the contents of his book, his work lends a degree of structure and credibility to the legend. Brickley's also commented on a perceived increase in paranormal activity in the area, suggesting in 2025 that a recent flurry of activity might be making the pigman and other entities a bit more brave. He describes the pigman as standing at least 7 foot tall, with the head of a pig and the body of a man, a terrifying image that's become the standard depiction of the beast. Perhaps the most intriguing and darkly conspiratorial account comes not from an eyewitness, but from a whistleblower who claims the legend itself was a deliberate fabrication. According to a 2020 report in Birmingham Live, this anonymous whistleblower came forward with a story told to him by a friend who'd been stationed at a military base on Cannock Chase. The whistleblower alleged that his friend and some others had been tasked with spreading rumors around the local area about a human-pig hybrid on the loose in the woods. This revelation reframes the legend in an entirely new psyops light, suggesting that the fear experienced by locals may be the direct result of a psychological operation conducted by the Army. This theory is disturbing in its implications, claiming that the legend was intentionally seeded into the community, blurring the lines between folklore, gaslighting, and a potentially real, unexplained phenomena that the rumors may have actually been intentionally designed to obscure. In the end, the Pigman of Cannock Chase remains a chilling enigma. The legend is supported by a handful of anonymous accounts, the collected research of a dedicated local author, and one messed-up speculative origin story. But it's also undermined by a lack of verifiable, named eyewitnesses and a counter-narrative suggesting it could all be a cleverly calculated hoax. This ambiguity makes the story all that much more unsettling. The possibility that a 7-foot-tall pigman roams the woods is terrifying, but the possibility that a government entity would create and spread such a story to manipulate a community is a darker and somewhat far more credible sort of horror story. The exact truth behind the reports remains elusive. Yet the persistence of these legends reflects something important about modern folklore. Cannock Chase becomes a symbolic landscape onto which numerous anxieties are actively projected simultaneously. Fear of hidden experiments, fear of ancient evil, fear of the wilderness, fear of contamination, fear, fear, fear. And somewhere, moving through all of it, was the image of the upright, swine-headed humanoid, a creature both profoundly absurd and quite disturbing. Because unlike many other monsters, for some reason the pigman never quite feels entirely impossible. While Anglo-American pigman legends dominate much of modern internet folklore, similar motifs appear throughout Latin America as well. Among the more intriguing examples are stories associated with entities sometimes referred to as cabeza de chancho, roughly translating into pighead or pig-headed being, depending upon regional usage and interpretation. Unlike many American urban legends centered primarily around isolated roads and meddling teenagers with their Great Dane and a crazy painted-up Volkswagen van, these stories often emerge from ranching regions and rural oral traditions deeply intertwined with beliefs concerning witchcraft, shape-shifting, curses, and supernatural assaults. Descriptions vary significantly between regions. Some witnesses describe a large humanoid creature with the head of a pig stalking livestock at night. Others portray the entity as partially human, capable of moving unnaturally between animal and upright forms. Certain stories connect the being to brujeria practices or some form of punishment resulting from the use of forbidden rituals. In some narratives, the creature functions almost like a cautionary tale concerning greed, cruelty, or moral corruption. Ranchers who mistreat workers or violate spiritual taboos allegedly attract the attention of the pig-headed entity. Elsewhere, stories suggest the creature itself was once human before becoming transformed through supernatural means. These legends also overlap thematically within broader Mesoamerican and Latin American traditions involving Nahua-like transformation beliefs. Across numerous indigenous and folk traditions, stories persisted concerning individuals capable of taking animal forms or becoming spiritually fused with beasts through ritual means. While pig imagery wasn't universally central to these beliefs, the concept of unstable human-animal identity already existed deeply within the regional folklore. And once again, the same anxieties emerge. The fear of losing humanity, the fear of appetite overpowering morality, and the fear that beneath the civilized surface of ordinary life there remains something animal waiting to be unleashed. In Chile, this primal fear coalesced into the terrifying figure of El Cabeza de Chancho, or the pighead, a monstrous entity deeply embedded in the nation's urban legends and rural folklore, with stories dating back as far as the 1930s. This isn't some subtle spirit, but a grotesque, visceral horror. El Cabeza de Chancho is described as a towering, naked humanoid with the head of a pig, its muscular body often smeared with dirt, blood, or ash. In a chilling detail that speaks to a blend of the primal and the human, it covers only its genitals. So, big thanks for little favors, but carries a large, human-made weapon, a Chilean-style corvo knife, or a machete. This combination of animalistic savagery and armed intent transforms the creature from a simple beast into a predatory, malevolent force, a symbol of supernatural vengeance and deformity that haunts the rural imagination. The origins of El Cabeza de Chancho are as varied and disturbing as its appearance, with no single narrative able to claim dominance. One particularly dark interpretation posits that the creature isn't a single being at all, but rather a cursed spirit, a vengeful embodiment born from the collective agony of pigs slaughtered in industrial or cruel farming practices. In this version, the pig head is the literal manifestation of karmic retribution, a supernatural force that rises from the blood-soaked earth to exact a terrible price on humanity for its cruelty. This origin story taps into deep-seated anxieties about industrialization and the disconnection from the natural world, suggesting that the violence inflicted upon animals can supernaturally fester and return to haunt the perpetrators. It frames the entity not as a random monster, but as a consequence of human actions, a dark mirror reflecting society's own foul deeds back at itself. The creature's notoriety is such that it's often mentioned alongside other legendary figures of Latin American terror. In a Reddit discussion on Chilean cryptids, users listed El Hombre Cabeza de Chancho alongside El Viejo del Saco, or the Sack Man, placing it in the same pantheon of nightmare figures used to frighten children and caution against misbehavior. This association is significant. It frames the pighead not as an isolated monster, but as part of a broader ecosystem of folklore that addresses deep-seated societal fears. The Sack Man, for instance, is a bogeyman who carries away disobedient children, while El Cabeza de Chancho represents a more adult fear, the terror of the unknown wild, the breakdown of the boundary between human and animal, and the possibility of encountering a force so alien and so hostile that it defies all reason. Its legend persists because it serves as a powerful cautionary symbol of what happens when the thin veneer of civilization is stripped away, revealing the raw, violent, and animalistic nature that folklore insists is always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting in the dark of the Chilean countryside. As America entered the late 20th century, pigman stories increasingly absorbed themes connected to pollution, radiation, toxic waste, and failed scientific progress. This shift mirrored broader cultural anxieties emerging during the Cold War and post-industrial era. Across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and portions of the Northeast, local legends began incorporating chemical spills, abandoned factories, and government experimentation into existing pigman mythology. Witnesses described creatures dwelling near contaminated rivers, drainage systems, and industrial ruins. In some versions, the pigman originated from laboratory experiments involving hybridization. In others, exposure to toxic chemicals transformed ordinary humans into grotesque creatures. These stories reflected a changing cultural landscape. During the 20th century, many communities witnessed firsthand the environmental devastation caused by industrial decline. Rivers caught fire. Industrial waste leaked into the soil and groundwater. Entire towns became economically hollowed out. The countryside itself started feeling poisoned, and naturally, the folklore adapted. The pigman evolved from cursed noblemen and fairy tale monsters into a biological nightmare generated via postmodernity. Better dying through chemistry and all that. This transition appears clearly in countless regional stories involving abandoned slaughterhouses or meat processing facilities. Teenagers exploring such locations allegedly encounter strange sounds, mutilated animal remains, or humanoid figures moving within darkened structures. Paranormal investigators later amplified these stories online, blending traditional urban legend motifs with conspiracy culture and cryptozoological speculation. Interestingly, many of these accounts contain imagery remarkably similar to older fairy tale folklore, despite their modern framing. The isolated structure at the edge of civilization, the taboos surrounding certain specific locations, these transformative contaminations affecting human bodies, the crossing into forbidden territories. The settings have changed, but the underlying psychological structure remains the same. There's one detail, however, that appears with striking consistency across many of these alleged pigman encounters. The smell. Witnesses repeatedly describe overpowering odors preceding or accompanying sightings. Rotting meat, wet animal musk, stagnant mud, blood, shit, death, and decay. This detail matters because smell functions as one of the most primal human senses. Olfactory responses bypass many of our rational filters and connect directly to memory and instinctive emotional reactions. Numerous folkloric entities across cultures possess distinctive odors associated with death, wilderness, corruption, or disease. In pigman reports, the smell reinforces the contamination anxiety. The creature doesn't merely just look wrong, it carries along with it a sensory atmosphere of decay itself. Some paranormal researchers have noted that witnesses often describe becoming physically nauseated during alleged encounters. Others report sudden panic, dizziness, or overwhelming dread before even having fully perceived the figure. Skeptics naturally attribute such experiences to fear responses, environmental conditions, or suggestibility. Yet from a folkloric perspective, the reoccurrence of these details is fascinating. The pigman is rarely elegant or supernatural in the ethereal sense. It's muddy, wet, heavy, physical, a thing of flesh. And that may be precisely what makes it so horrifying. By the way, if anyone's interested, Joshua Cutchin wrote an excellent book all about the associated smells and odors with supernatural or modern-day high strangeness encounters. Check it out. The Brimstone Deceit? The Brimstone Deception? I think that's what it's called. I could be wrong. Check it out. Joshua Cutchin. All of his books are great. Anywho. An enormous portion of modern pigman mythology survives through adolescent rites of passage associated with tests of courage, often in the form of dares, double dares, or even the dreaded double dog dare. Teenagers gather near abandoned roads, bridges, and tunnels after dark, searching for evidence of the creature. This ritualistic aspect deserves serious attention because it reveals how urban legends function socially. Driving to haunted locations allows young people to confront fear within a controlled environment. The pigman becomes a communal test of courage. Yet these rituals, often referred to as ostension in folklore studies, also preserve and transmit folklore across generations. Each retelling adds new details. Each frightened reaction reinforces belief. Importantly, many pigman locations exist in liminal zones between suburban expansion and rural abandonment. Housing developments sit only miles away from collapsing barns, overgrown trails, and forgotten industrial structures. The modern world brushes up against older landscapes still carrying traces of agricultural life. The pigman inhabits those borders, neither fully wild nor fully civilized, much like the pig, or for that matter, perhaps even the pigman itself. Beyond explicitly humanoid pig creatures, European folklore contains a rich tradition of supernatural swine associated with death and misfortune. In English folklore, phantom black pigs reportedly haunted lonely roads and crossroads. Witnesses encountering such apparitions sometimes interpreted them as omens of impending death and disaster. In parts of Cornwall and East Anglia, stories circulated concerning spectral pigs appearing before accidents or funerals. Scandinavian traditions included demonic boars connected to the wild hunt and nocturnal supernatural processions. Elsewhere, black pigs guarded hidden treasure or ancient burial grounds. These legends matter because they establish pigs as liminal creatures capable of moving between worlds. The pigman may therefore represent an extension of much older symbolic systems rather than an entirely separate phenomenon. Even in modern encounters, witnesses frequently describe the creature appearing briefly before vanishing unnaturally into darkness or woodland. It emerges and disappears like folklore itself, half seen and half remembered. Perhaps the deepest reason pigman stories persist lies in their body horror aspect. Human beings instinctively fear distorted versions of themselves. The uncanny valley effect demonstrates how deeply disturbing near-human entities can become. a pig-headed humanoid triggers multiple anxieties simultaneously. It still resembles humanity while simultaneously violating human identity. Modern medical science unintentionally intensified these fears. Pig valves implanted into human hearts, pig skin used in grafts, genetic modification research, xenotransplantation experiments, scientific discussions concerning interspecies compatibility. Every advancement reinforced the uncomfortable reality that pigs and humans share disturbing biological similarities. The pigman therefore occupies a uniquely modern symbolic position. Ancient enough for folklore, yet modern enough for laboratories. The pigman feels like a medieval nightmare wandering directly into the era of biotechnology. Popular culture repeatedly returns to similar imagery. Mutant swine in horror films, animal-human hybrids and conspiracy theories, meat processing dystopias, cannibalistic livestock, scientific arrogance creating grotesque new life forms. These themes resonate because they touch something profoundly uncomfortable within the human psyche. We fear becoming livestock. We fear industrial systems reducing bodies to meat. Anything contrary to our long, deep-seated belief that we sit at the very tippity top of the food chain. And somewhere within that fear stands the pigman, staring back at us like a reflection distorted in muddy waters. There's one particular type of pigman story that surfaces repeatedly in isolated communities. The lone witness, no dramatic chase, no elaborate mythology, just someone driving home late at night who sees something impossible standing where it shouldn't be. A hunter near a tree line, a figure beside a drainage ditch, a silhouette crossing the road. These stories are often strangely restrained. Witnesses don't always describe tusks or monstrous violence. Sometimes they simply describe proportions that feel wrong. A posture too hunched, arms too long, a head shaped oddly beneath sparse dark hair. And almost always there comes the same moment. The thing turns, the witness sees the snout, and panic consumes them all at once. Perhaps that's why pigman legends endure while so many other monsters fade. Because the pigman doesn't belong entirely in the realm of fantasy. The creature stands uncomfortably close to reality. Close enough to smell. Close enough to imagine. Across centuries, humanity repeatedly reinvents the same nightmares, using whatever language their particular era provides them with. Medieval curses, fairy punishments, degenerate aristocrats, escaped lunatics, toxic mutations, hybrid experiments, cryptids stalking abandoned roads in the dark. The explanations change, but the shape remains. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the desolate fields and haunted slaughterhouses, beyond the drainage tunnels and collapsing barns, something still waits at the edge of the headlights. And maybe every isolated town eventually creates its own pigman because deep down, people understand something ancient and deeply uncomfortable. But the line allegedly separating human beings from animals isn't nearly as thick as we pretend it is. The mud's closer than we think. And sometimes, late at night, if the roads are empty enough and the woods are quiet enough, people still claim they hear squealing coming from somewhere out there, beyond the fence line. Not just any old ordinary squealing now, mind you. Something much heavier. Something breathing. Something standing upright. Something standing right behind you. That's going to do it for this episode of Kooks, Craigs, and Iconoclast, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I've got other farm animals lined up for future exploration. Still working on my big multi-part series. Just the more I get into it, the crazier it becomes. I just want to make sure I'm pulling this off right, because it's a scene, man. Anywho. Yeah. This has been it for Kooks, Craigs, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Luck. I will see you guys on the next one. Peace. Love you guys. Take care of yourselves. Tell your friends and family every chance you get that you love them, because you might not always get to. So let them know. See you guys next episode. Wee, wee, wee. All the way home.